Welcome to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans. When making important decisions for your agricultural operation, it is important to take a step back and get perspective, especially when it comes to estate planning and leasing. This is particularly important when family is working together in the business, which can often lead to rifts among family members who may feel treated unfairly. For more on these issues and how to avoid them while maintaining good family relations, I am here with Allan Vyhnalek, a Nebraska Extension Educator in Farm and Ranch Transition and Succession. Allan, it's good to be with you again.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, so you have a new article that's up on our website at cap.unl.edu about this very issue. And how have you seen situations like this where someone thinks they're being treated unfairly like this play out between two parties, especially family members, where perceptions of fairness can start to cause divisions?
Well, typically the perception of fairness is interesting. It's an interesting concept because, quite honestly, Ryan, your definition of fair and my definition of fair can be completely different. And so that's a tough thing to negotiate and a tough thing to traverse because we don't always view what's fair the same way. And particularly when we talk about farm stuff, I think that sometimes we have to get over the idea or figure out that the idea that sometimes fair is not always equal. I think a lot of people think that fair has to be equal. And in some cases, fair didn't have to be equal. And I think we'll be talking about more about that here in a little bit. So keep listening.
Yeah, and are there some common issues that you see that might cause these rifts?
Yeah, the most common issue with about 90, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's big percent. 95% of the situations like this where somebody doesn't feel like they've been treated equitably is that in a vast majority, either they're getting no information or they're not getting incomplete information, not getting all the information. So it's a function of communication and making sure that all farm family members are kept informed of what's going on, whether they're on the farm or not. In many cases, I know of specifically sisters of the farmer. The brother stayed on the farm, sister moved off the farm. Now, 40 years later, the parents passed away. And the sister comes up to me and says, well, I don't understand what happened, Allan. They go, when I was on the farm with mom and dad rented all the farm ground from the neighbors. Now I found out my brother's renting the farm ground. When I was on the farm, my mom and dad owned all the equipment. Now I found out my brother owns all the equipment. How'd that happen? When I was on the farm, my parents owned all the livestock. Now I find out that my brother owns cattle. And so it's because they've not been told what's happened over those years, decades in cases, some of these cases. Now they think it's the same as it was 40 years ago when they were on the farm, and it's not. Obviously, things change, and so making sure that off-farm kid, that off-farm person, kind of knows what's been going on out there is kind of an important concept, an important thing for everybody to understand. And the on-farm person needs to ask questions, and the on-farm, without sounding like they're trying to be nosy or just trying to make judgment. And the on-farm people need to just remember, hey, this doesn't pertain to them, but they still need to know from an overall estate planning perspective what happened here.
Yeah, communication, as you always talk about, is so important in building trust, and trust is extremely essential in these situations. So what are some strategies that you recommend, especially for families who are in business together, to build that trust?
Well, I think maybe the first conversation we ought to have as a family is when we have, especially when we have an estate plan where mom and dad passed away and now we're getting the kids together to decide what's going to happen next. I think maybe the first conversation ought not to be what cash rent ought to be for that farm going forward, or should not be how we're going to divide the farm up or anything like that, or who gets grandma's yellow pie plate. We're something those kind of things. It shouldn't be about those tangible items. I think the first conversation should be as a family, or are we going to continue to have a family or not? Are we going to get together on the holidays? Are we going to get together to celebrate each other's birthdays and funerals and other events in our lives? If that's important to us, we want to continue to get together, then I think we all have to make that commitment. In some cases, some family members get the almighty dollar sign in their eyes or in their brain, and thinking about the dollar causes greed and greed causes a terrible emotional response that is not very conducive to understanding that we have to get along as a family, and that we have to make this commitment that the family will still get together at the holidays and do all those things we want to do as a family. So what's our commitment to? Are we still going to have a family or not? That's the question. And maybe that's the first conversation that the family members ought to have. I mean, that's the first step to building that trust that you alluded to a minute ago. And I think I'll give some other ideas about that here in a minute.
Yeah, and could you just walk through a potential possible situation as an example of trust or fairness issues maybe getting in the way of good family business relationships, and then how that situation might be best handled?
Well, I think the goal of my article was to talk about make sure that you get everyone's perspective or get everyone's input before you make a decision about what's happened. So I can think of a specific instance where grandpa and grandma passed away. There's 4 kids in the situation, 4 kids left over in the family now. One of the boys was farming. The other 3 were not farmers. And so the 4 of them sat down now. The mom and dad were gone, and they wanted to keep the farmer farming. They still wanted him to farm the family ground. But then the conversation was, what are we going to do for cash rent for the on-farm son? And so the first question was, on-farm son, brother, what are you paying mom? What were you paying mom and dad for rent? And he was paying a rent that was good about 30 years ago. It was about $65 an acre, and at that time, for that ground and that location, it was probably $300 an acre for cash rent. So immediately, that causes a damage in the trust. It just causes a damage in the sense of fairness. It causes a damage in all kinds of things. And the bottom line is, I think you have to stop, and instead of assuming that the on-farm brother is not treating his parents very fairly or equitably, you have to ask more questions. You have to stop and ask more questions. And so what if in this situation, the farmer, the brother that farmed, was only paying mom and dad $65 an acre, and should have been paying $300 an acre under a normal rental relationship? Well, what if the on-farm kid was paying all the taxes? $65 an acre, that wouldn't have covered the taxes, quite honestly. So maybe the on-farm kid was covering all the taxes, paying all the taxes. What if this on-farm kid took care of all the repairs on the pivot if there was irrigation out there, and paid all the fees for irrigation maintenance and the motors and all that sort of thing? What if he was just doing that, never submitted a bill to mom and dad? What if this on-farm kid was taking care of all the dirt work and all the expense of getting the dozers out there to move trees and take care of ditches and do all those kind of things we do from time to time? They're typically landowner expenses. Maybe he never submitted a bill to mom and dad at $65 an acre. Maybe he just took care of it. What if this kid lived on the farmstead? This son lived on the farmstead, and he took care of the roads. He replaced roads, and he replaced siding, and he put in windows, and took care of the house, and rocked the driveway, and did all those things that we normally consider to be landowner expenses. What if this son and his wife were the ones providing all the care to mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, before they passed, as in moving them to the assisted living and into nursing facilities and into hospice and end-of-life medical treatments and end-of-life doctor appointments, which tend to mound up as you get, for some certain individuals. So, the bottom line is they probably did a lot for that couple because they lived in that same town. And then what I would try to say is maybe if you could analyze everything that's going on by asking good questions, $65 was plenty. Maybe that was enough because he was bearing a lot of the cost himself and taking care of things and never submitting a bill to mom and dad. So make sure you stop and ask the questions and find out what's going on before you make an assumption that someone's not treating their parents equitably or trying to shortcut a lease. Make sure you ask for that information.
That's great. And that difference between fair and equal, you talk about that a lot. Is that difficult for people to grasp sometimes, especially if they're off the farm and not involved as you described? And then what, if you could just drive that point home one more time, what should all parties keep in mind if they want to, at the end of the day, as you said, still have a family and still have a business? Yeah,
so there's a couple things to think about. First of all, everybody's got to understand that when it comes to estate planning and deciding where the farm goes and who gets what and all those kinds of things, that that the golden rule applies here. And the golden rule is not what we hear in church, to do unto others as others do unto you. It's not that golden rule. This golden rule is you as the gold makes the rule. So grandpa and grandma, mom and dad decide this is the way they want their estate settled, then they make the rule, and that's the way the estate's going to get settled. And so we have to understand. So I want to tell a story to illustrate my point. A farmer calls me up here over a year ago now and says, my sister's taking me to court. And I said, why is she taking you to court? She says she's contesting the will because mom and dad believe that my sweat equity should be recognized, and they gave me a bigger chunk of the pie in the estate plan because they said he should get credit for his sweat equity out there all those years, in many cases 30, 40, up to 50 years of work out there with mom and dad, and he needs to have a bigger piece of the pie so his farming operation is successful. That was his parents' definition of fair, and he thought he accepted that as being fine. The sister's definition of fair was that everything had to be split equally, 50-50. So her definition was, I'm not getting a fair shake. I'm not getting my equitable portion of this thing. And so she was contesting the whole will in court that the parents drew and parents put together because she didn't think she was being treated equally. Well, guess what? In a farming situation, farm and ranch succession transition, sometimes fair does not have to be equal. Equal does not have to be fair. And clearly, in my view, in most people's view, sweat equity should be recognized.
Great stuff from Allan Vyhnalek, a Nebraska Extension Educator for farm and ranch transition and succession. And you can find out more about his work educating Nebraskans in this area on our website for the Center for Ag Profitability at CAP. That's CAP. cap.unl.edu/succession. And he has a new article up there on our website right now about what we've been talking about here on this episode, all about getting perspective before making those big decisions. So, Allan, thanks as always for the great information and for taking the time to talk today.
Thanks again for having me, Ryan.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.